I made a shocking discovery in my wife's bag that almost ended our marriage. The moment I caught them together, everything shifted. Emily, my wife of 10 years, greeted me as usual when I returned home that Tuesday evening. But instead of our normal chat, she asked me to sit down, saying we needed to discuss something serious. Here we go again, I thought, preparing for another intense conversation. As I sat, Emily began by expressing her love for me and her commitment to our marriage. Oddly, her words didn't soothe me, they only made me more anxious. I responded with a tentative, "All right." Before I could say more, she took a deep breath and got to the point. "I love you," she began. "And I see us growing old together, but I've decided I want to pursue another relationship." I was stunned. It was difficult to comprehend. Confused, I asked, "Wait, so you love me, don't want to ruin what we have, yet you plan to be with someone else?" Emily clarified, "It's not exactly like that. I've met someone, and I want a physical connection with him. It wouldn't be frequent, just now and then, and I'd be completely open about it. I believe our love is strong enough that this won't change how I feel about you. If you love me as much as you claim, you'll understand this is something I need." She said it with such calm conviction, as if it were perfectly reasonable. Still in disbelief, I asked, "How do you think this won't affect us? Have you already made plans?" Without hesitation, she confirmed, "Yes, we're tentatively planning a weekend getaway next week." Then she asked, as if testing me, "How would you react if the roles were reversed?" I gave an honest answer. I'd be okay with it, as long as you assured me it wouldn't change our relationship. Emily wasn't convinced. "Come on, you know that's not true," she said. "You'd be furious if I suggested this." I scoffed at her assumption, which seemed to surprise her. "I didn't expect this from you," she said, sounding disappointed. "I thought your love for me would be enough to accept this." I stared back, baffled. "I don't know what you've been imagining," I replied, "but it's not realistic. Do you really think I'd just allow you to have an affair? Am I supposed to sit here while you spend the weekend with another man?" For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "Maybe I didn't think this through," she admitted, looking down. "You're right, I didn't consider everything, even my own feelings. But if I say no now, will you still go through with it?" She looked me in the eyes and quietly said, "I don't know." It was clear neither of us had thought this through. "Let's give it a few days," she suggested. "I need time to think, and we can talk again on Sunday." Feeling shaken, I decided I couldn't share a bed with her that night. I started gathering my things to move to the guest room. Emily noticed and asked what I was doing. "I don't feel like sleeping next to someone who's more focused on someone else than me," I said flatly. I closed the guest room door harder than I intended, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. The night was long and sleepless, giving me time to form a plan. I realized that if Emily followed through, there'd be no saving our marriage. The next morning, I left for work as usual, but we didn't speak. Once I reached the office, I requested a few days off for personal reasons. I put my plan into action. I bought 3 voice-activated recorders, placing them near the phone, in the bedroom, and in her car. I also set up a phone tab to monitor any calls from the landline. Then I went to our phone provider. Since I managed her account, it was easy to get her phone records. I found an unknown email account of hers and, after guessing the password, saw she hadn't yet been with the man. I set the account to forward new messages to me discreetly. Next, I bought 2 GPS trackers, one for her wallet and one for her car. By the end of the day, I was set to monitor her movements. All that was left was accessing her phone to check messages, which I planned to do that night while planting the GPS devices. When I checked her emails later, I saw she had exchanged messages with a coworker named John Smith. So, John was at the center of this. I felt a surge of anger. The emails confirmed that their weekend plans were still on, regardless of my reaction. On Friday, I visited a divorce attorney and initiated proceedings, citing infidelity, with John Smith named as the third party. The lawyer assured me it would be straightforward with the evidence I had: emails, phone records, and soon, recordings. That evening, when Emily came home, I ignored her completely as she prepared dinner. I left for a bar to eat and have a drink, avoiding her attempts to start a conversation upon my return. I shut myself in the guest room. At that point, the only way to save our marriage was for her to cancel her plans with John, but I wasn't hopeful. I avoided her all weekend. By Sunday afternoon, I decided it was time to talk. Sitting in the kitchen, I explained that after much thought, I couldn't accept her request. I reminded her that, despite her claim it wouldn't affect our marriage, it was already tearing us apart. I suggested that perhaps she'd understand my perspective if she imagined herself in my position. I've tried to understand your perspective, I said, but no matter how I look at it, nothing positive can come from this. So, I had to say no. Her response was sharp. How can you be so selfish? If you love me, why can't you let me have this? I was stunned that she turned it on me like that. Selfish? I shot back. I think it's pretty selfish of you to want to be with someone else after all we've built together. She stared at me and challenged. And what if I go through with it anyway? I replied firmly, there will be consequences. We made vows 10 years ago to be faithful to each other. I know, she insisted, but this is something I feel I need to do. At that point, I knew the conversation was over. Well, I guess we're done here then. You need to think very hard about this, I said, grabbing my laptop and walking out of the house. I needed some space, so I found a nearby spot to monitor their emails without her hovering. Emily was furious. I watched her email John, confirming that she was definitely going, no matter what I said. John seemed eager, replying that he had booked room 218 at the Hilton in St. Louis for Friday and Saturday night. Once I read that, I reserved that very room for Thursday night. Their messages even detailed plans for a romantic Saturday, with dinner, dancing, and alone time. Emily mentioned buying new lingerie for the occasion. I sat there, eating while keeping an eye on their exchanges. They'd already moved on from my refusal, fully planning their weekend. Check-in was set for 3 p.m., and John would pick her up at 1 since it was a 2-hour drive. I was shocked he planned to pick her up right from our house. I needed to decide how to handle that. To be thorough, I reserved a room near theirs to capture everything. In the following days, I gathered everything I needed, including discrete HD fiber optic cameras, to set up in their room on Thursday. It was perfect evidence for my divorce case. Meanwhile, I kept giving Emily the silent treatment. Wednesday came, her day of reckoning. I offered her one last chance to reconsider. I asked her to sit with me at the table. She wasn't thrilled but complied. I asked if she'd thought things over. She confirmed she had, then firmly said she was going through with it. She talked about the trip with John and hoped we could move past it. I let out a long sigh and warned her one last time, telling her not to throw away our marriage for a fling and outlining the consequences. She stood her ground. Nothing I said could change her mind. I ended the conversation bluntly. So, you've chosen John over me. The decision was clear. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. It was evident now that our marriage was over, and someone would have to face the fallout. Thursday morning, I requested the afternoon off, along with Friday, to finalize the divorce process. My boss was supportive, granting the time off. I drove to St. Louis, checked into their room, and installed the surveillance equipment, making sure everything was positioned correctly and functional. Once everything was set up, I tested the cameras to ensure they captured everything. I then walked down the hall to confirm I was within monitoring range. When I returned home that evening, the reality sank in. My marriage was truly over. But I had one more thing to do. I went to a store and picked up a small can of pepper spray, intending to disrupt their romantic evening. Upon returning home, Emily was in the kitchen, watching me expectantly. I walked past her silently, slamming the door behind me as before. She followed, trying to act friendly, but I wasn't interested. Save that for John, I said. I don't need your pity. I turned away, and she left. That night, I barely slept, but I knew everything was set to end this affair. Friday morning, I left the house without a word and headed straight to my lawyer's office to sign the divorce papers. I told them I'd have all the evidence by Monday and asked for the papers to be served to Emily at her workplace, along with John being served for alienation of affection. When I checked Emily's GPS, she was at the salon, so I seized my chance. I went home, opened her suitcase, and found the new lingerie she'd bought. It was undeniably attractive, but it hurt knowing it wasn't for me. With gloves on, I sprayed the lingerie with pepper spray and returned it to her suitcase. I couldn't help but grin. It was going to be an interesting outcome. I then went to the bank, closed all joint accounts, and moved the money to a new account under my name, canceling shared credit cards. By 12:30, I was back home, knowing Emily would be preparing for her weekend. I found her upstairs, wearing lingerie I had given her. Embarrassed, she tried to cover up, but I stopped her. "Don't bother," I said. "I've seen it all before." She looked stunning, new hairstyle, flawless makeup, and alluring lingerie. "You look amazing today," I admitted. "It's just sad you never tried this hard for me." She explained she just wanted to feel good about herself. "Well, you do," I said, "but it seems like you care more about impressing him than you ever did about me." She apologized, saying she only wanted to feel attractive. I sighed and reminded her she'd always been beautiful to me. "I've always loved you, and I thought you loved me too," I said, softly removing her wedding rings. "These rings symbolized our promise to forsake others," I continued. "But clearly, that means less to you now." I told her I didn't want to see her wearing my ring while with another man. I reminded her the engagement ring belonged to my mother and that I intended to keep it. Emily was shocked but silent as I pocketed the rings. "I won't be here when John arrives," I said calmly. "But don't let him step foot in this house. If you do, I promise it'll be unforgettable for both of you." She asked what I meant, but I was clear. "He's not welcome here, Emily. Do you understand?" "Yes," she replied. "I won't let him inside." "Good," I said, "because I'll be watching." She looked at me, hurt in her eyes, and asked, "Why are you acting like this?" I replied, "Because the person I loved threw away everything we had." I sighed, turned, and walked out, leaving her standing there. As I left the house, she yelled after me, but I was done listening. I parked a few blocks away, just out of sight but close enough to see if John arrived. If he dared step into the house, I was ready to risk everything, but they'd regret it more than I would. Soon, his car arrived. I watched as he approached the door, and Emily stepped out with her suitcase. They hugged and shared a long kiss. John picked up her suitcase, and as they left, Emily looked my way with a smug smile. As they drove past, she gave me a cocky look, but I flipped her off, wiping the grin from her face. After they left, I headed to St. Louis. Once I checked into the hotel, I went straight to the room and set up my laptop. The camera I had installed earlier was perfectly aimed at the foot of the bed, and soon enough, there was Emily, making her move. It was clear they had already been together, though it didn't seem like John had lasted very long. He came out of the bathroom, and I couldn't help but laugh at what I saw. It wasn't what Emily was used to. I watched as John got back into bed, ready for another round. Emily smiled at him, but I laughed again when she reached down. It was clear she wasn't going to be satisfied with how this weekend was turning out. She'd leave disappointed, come home for one last night, and by the next day, she'd be out of my life for good. John tried again, but it wasn't much better. Honestly, this was going better than I imagined. I couldn't stand to watch anymore, so I left everything recording and headed out for dinner and a couple of drinks. Every second of their encounter was captured, perfect evidence for my lawyer, and proof of the poor choices Emily had made. When I came back, John was asleep, and Emily was sitting there, looking frustrated. What started out difficult was quickly becoming amusing. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the next day and what I might do to mess with John. I even thought about some of the women I had seen earlier at the bar. Soon, I'd be free to pursue anyone, no strings attached. With that thought in mind, I drifted off to sleep, smiling for the first time in a while. The pain was gone, and I knew exactly where I was headed. The next morning, I woke up ready for the day. After a quick shower, I grabbed breakfast and some snacks to keep with me. Then, I had an idea. I called a local florist and ordered a bouquet for Emily, the same kind I used to send her on our anniversaries. Since this was going to be the last anniversary gift she'd ever get from me, I wanted her to think about what she was throwing away. I scheduled the delivery for 11 a.m., right when things would probably be getting interesting with John. It turned out I had timed it perfectly. They had left the room for a while, but when they came back, the action started again. They hadn't been at it long when there was a knock at the door. The flowers had arrived right on time. I watched as Emily's face shifted from surprise to annoyance. She grabbed her phone and called me immediately. The phone rang, and I answered calmly. "Hello, did you send me flowers?" she asked, already sounding upset. "Oh, you got them. Well, it hasn't been a great day for me either. My wife's off with some other guy, and here I am trying to stay sane." My voice was casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Why do you even care?" I asked. "Because," she snapped, "they're the same flowers you always send me for our anniversaries." I laughed. And you think I did that? If I had sent those flowers, they wouldn't have been roses. They'd have been weeds, with a card saying, "To my unfaithful wife." But maybe they'll remind you of what you're about to lose. There was silence on the other end before I hung up. She tried calling me back several times, but I didn't answer. Eventually, she gave up. I saw her talking to John about it, and he tried to comfort her, saying I'd come around. He couldn't have been more wrong. Emily wasn't happy after our exchange, but it didn't take long before she got close to him again. That's when I had another idea. I picked up the phone and ordered her favorite pizza, the one I knew she couldn't resist. The pizza arrived just as John was trying to get back into the rhythm of things. He wasn't thrilled with the interruption and tried to refuse the delivery, but the driver insisted, confirming the room and John's phone number. With no choice, he paid for it, or the driver was ready to call security. After the pizza was dropped off, they decided to eat, since it was already paid for. After their meal, they talked for a bit, but John couldn't wait long before he was after her again. That's when I ordered her favorite sandwich from a local deli, just to keep things going. A few minutes into their next session, there was another knock. This time, it was the sandwich. Emily's face dropped, and she finally realized that I knew exactly where they were. John couldn't believe it, but Emily started piecing it together. She figured I had hacked into her email and tracked them down. She told him I was good at that sort of thing, and it wouldn't have been hard for me to figure out. They got dressed and decided to leave for a while, planning to return later that evening. Emily promised John she'd make it up to him. As they left, I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. When they got back later, they showered, dressed up, and Emily even put on some special lingerie, giving John a little show. He tried again, but she insisted they go out for their big date. I couldn't wait for the next part of my plan. Emily had no idea what was coming. As they left the hotel, looking like the picture of romance, I settled in to wait. I knew things were about to get interesting. About an hour after their date, they returned to the hotel, and Emily rushed to the bathroom. She stayed in the shower for much longer than usual. When she came out, it was clear she was uncomfortable. Her skin was visibly irritated. Poor John wasn't going to get much more out of the evening. Emily collapsed on the bed, clearly in discomfort, and when John tried to get close again, she snapped, saying she wasn't feeling well. She blamed it on an allergic reaction to her new outfit, but little did she know I had a hand in that. While she dealt with her issue, I spent the evening organizing all the footage I had captured, preparing it for my lawyer. By the time everything was done, I called it a night. It had been a successful day, and I couldn't help but smile. The best part was that I was just getting started. Sunday morning, I packed up and headed home. I knew Emily would face reality soon enough. When John dropped her off later that afternoon, he didn't even walk her to the door. I was sitting on the couch, watching football, and didn't acknowledge her as she walked in. She stood in front of the TV, smiling at me. "I figured you'd be happy to see me, since I'm not dead," she teased, trying to act cute. Without looking away from the screen, I responded, "What made you think that? Do you think I've suddenly lost my mind?" She changed her tone, saying, "I didn't think you were dumb. I just thought your love for me was enough to get past this." I finally looked at her and said flatly, "I did love you. But that changed when you left with another man," ignoring everything I said. I poured my heart out, and it meant nothing. Emily seemed shocked. "I can't believe you feel that way," she muttered. "Believe it," I replied. "You made a big mistake." She softened, asking if there was any way to move forward, promising she'd do anything to fix things. I gave her a sarcastic smile. "Anything? How about apologizing right now?" She scoffed at the idea. "I can't do that," she said. I sighed. "I knew you wouldn't. Just like you couldn't keep the promises you made when we got married. You said you'd be faithful, and look where we are." Emily shifted uncomfortably, telling me she had been thinking about me all day and wanted to make things right. I wasn't buying it. I told her I wasn't interested. She looked surprised, and I asked her if she had been careful. She said she had. I wasn't convinced. I told her that I wouldn't touch her until she had seen a doctor. She tried to push back, suggesting I could use protection if I didn't trust her. I laughed bitterly. "You think I'm going to use protection with my own wife, after everything? You've got to be kidding me. You chose him over me, so forget it. I'm going out. I can't stand looking at you right now." I told her to sleep in the guest room and left the house to clear my head. After grabbing dinner, I came back, only to find her lying in our bed. I told her to get out. She argued, "This is our bed. I have as much right to it as you." I shot back, "You gave up that right when you slept with John. Get out of my bed, or I'll throw you and your things onto the street." She started crying, but I didn't flinch. She slowly got up and left the room, sobbing as she walked down the hallway. I made sure to lock the door behind her. The next morning, I ignored her completely. We both had breakfast, and she left for work at her usual time. Before she walked out the door, she paused and said, "I love you." I shot her a cold, scornful look. "I loved you too." Past tense. I watched as her eyes filled with tears, and she turned to leave. The moment she was gone, I began packing her belongings into garbage bags. Then, I reached out to John's wife. I asked her if she knew her husband had spent the weekend with my wife. She told me she thought he was on a business trip. I offered to share my evidence with her, and she quickly agreed. When I arrived at her door, I was surprised. She was absolutely stunning. I stammered for a second when John's wife opened the door, caught off guard by her appearance. I quickly apologized, blaming my reaction on being unprepared, which was entirely honest. Once I composed myself, I explained everything that had happened over the weekend. She was furious with John, and we agreed she would come with me to my lawyer's office to see if he could take her case. The lawyer agreed to represent her and even offered a discount. While she began filling out the paperwork, I had a quick conversation with the attorney. I asked if we needed to wait before serving John to protect her, but he assured me that as long as she signed the papers first, she'd be in the clear. After the paperwork was done, we went out for lunch while her divorce papers were finalized. Once she signed everything, I dropped her off at her home and returned, waiting for Linda to call. I knew she would be shocked once she found out what was coming. Sure enough, my phone rang around 3 p.m., and Linda sounded upset. "What is this?" she demanded. "I just got served with divorce papers, and John's been hit with a lawsuit for alienation of affection." I calmly replied, "It's all pretty straightforward, isn't it? I warned you there would be consequences, but it seems like you didn't believe me. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." She snapped back. I smirked. "Well, maybe you should have listened to me instead of believing whatever story John sold you. But look, let's not argue over the phone. We'll talk when you get here." After hanging up, I gathered her things, stuffed them into garbage bags, and tossed them into the front yard. I had everything ready to record what was about to happen, just in case I needed footage for a restraining order. When she pulled into the driveway and saw her things scattered across the lawn, she lost it. She screamed incoherently, hurling insults as she paced around. I stayed calm, watching her melt down until she finally began to break down. "If you want to talk, calm down so we can have a civil conversation," I told her. "If not, I'll pack your things into your car, and you can leave." Through sobs, she cried out, "I never thought you'd actually do this to me." I looked at her, unflinching. "Do this to you? You did this to us, Linda. I told you again and again not to go through with it, and you chose to destroy our marriage anyway. What made you think I wouldn't file for divorce? You said you loved me," she whimpered. "I did," I replied firmly. "I loved you more than anything. But you broke my heart. The real issue is, you never truly loved or respected me, and I can't stay with someone who thinks so little of me. Even though I still have feelings for you." Linda asked hesitantly, "Why do you keep calling him Little John?" I let out a humorless laugh. "I had cameras set up in your room all weekend. I saw everything. Let's just say he's not exactly what you'd expect. The first time I saw it, I laughed so hard I nearly cried. I even wondered if you could feel anything at all." Her face flushed with embarrassment. "We were together," she said quietly, "and I'll miss that." I wasn't going to let her play the victim. "Look, Linda, now you have the freedom to be with whoever you want. You can have a new guy every night if that's what you're after." She shook her head. "I don't want anyone else. I want you." Sighing, I said, "Let's sit down for a minute." We went to the kitchen and sat at the table, like we had so many times before. But this time, it hit me that it would be the last time we'd sit together like this. She looked at me and asked softly, "You wouldn't really hurt John, would you?" I stared at her. "Why not? He ruined our marriage. I think he should pay for that, beyond just a lawsuit and his divorce." She looked puzzled. "Wait, he's not getting a divorce, is he?" "He is now," I told her. "His wife understands the situation and is ready to end it. In fact, they're even sharing a lawyer, and he got a discount." Linda looked doubtful. You really believe that, or is this just some trick to make me look bad? I shook my head. I spoke to his wife this morning. I showed her all the evidence. John told her he was on a business trip. Now they're both done. She sat there quietly for a moment, reflecting. I wish you'd been honest with me when I asked how you'd react if I wanted to be with another man. I knew you'd go crazy. I laughed, a bitter sound. That's the thing. You don't believe me, even now, and that's one of the reasons we're getting divorced. Honestly, I don't care anymore. When you call him later, you'll find out he's been kicked to the curb just like you. So, you're really kicking me out? She asked in a small voice. Yes, Linda. I decided the night you told me about your plan. I went into the guest room to think, and within an hour, I knew I wanted a divorce. On Thursday, I bought everything I needed to gather evidence and access your email. By Friday, I had already visited the lawyer and started the divorce process. Linda, sensing her world falling apart, asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were planning to divorce me? Maybe I would have reconsidered. Is there any way you can forgive me?" I paused, feeling the weight of the moment. Linda, I loved you more than anything, and there might have been a chance for forgiveness, but that chance passed last night. You let it slip away. I sighed, looking away. Even if I could forgive you, I'd never be able to trust you again. I'd spend every day wondering when you'd want to be with someone else. I can't live like that. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I continued, firm but calm. Unlike you, I've thought this through, and no matter how much I reconsider it, I always reach the same conclusion. I'm going to divorce you. And I'm going to make sure John pays for his role in this. I could see the reality settling in for her. You can call him and figure out where you'll stay, but don't bother using your credit cards. I've canceled them. I left half the money in our checking account for you, and I've removed my name. I'll split our savings, and you can keep your car, but you'll handle the payments. Take your clothes, your personal items, whatever you need. I'll even let you have some furniture once you find a place to live. But the house? That's mine. If I sell it, I'll give you half, but everything's outlined in the divorce papers. If you contest it, I'll use the evidence I've gathered, and it won't end well for you. She nodded, her voice trembling. I won't fight it. This is all my fault. I just wish I could undo it. I tried to lighten the mood, though humor felt distant. You know the difference between a cheating spouse and a light bulb? She looked confused. No, what's the difference? You can't have a relationship with a light bulb, I said, but her expression stayed flat. She shook her head slightly, resigned. I'm not going to argue, she said softly. I know it's all on me. I just wish I could turn back time. Realizing we were done, I told her it was time for her to go. I helped her gather the last of her things, packing them into her car while she stood there, tears in her eyes. When everything was loaded, I handed her one last item, her wedding ring. I had flattened it with a hammer, turning it into a piece of scrap metal. You can sell it for cash, I said bluntly, watching the emotion flicker across her face. Then, I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Goodbye, Linda." I turned and walked back into the house without looking back. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. Trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.